his wife and 2 children. He enjoys running, backpacking, and learning about science and philosophy. And if that sounds similar to what you saw in your newsletter, I guess it is. But what is particularly important to me is that Dave held our hands as we fought the CPUC against their decision, their proposed decision to remove incentives to residential solar installations. So we took it to the state and weren't completely successful, but I really thank him for that, for exposing that to us so that we could get on board in the advocacy that we enjoy doing. So I present to you, Dave, and I thank you so much for being with us tonight.
And just one note is we'd like to get everybody to please mute, and then we will be doing Q&A at the end.
Great. Thank you, Diana. That's just such a nice introduction. It's really awesome to be back here. And thanks everyone for everything. Thank you for your work, in fighting and standing up for everyone's ability to get rooftop solar, for everything else that you do to try to make the world a better place. And so let me get started. I'm going to go through some slides and share my screen, and then we'll do questions. And the questions are always the fun part. So I'll try to keep my stuff as succinct as possible. So now is the time where I got to share my screen. That's always interesting. So hang on just a sec while I figure that out. Okay, here we go. All right. I just get like a thumbs up that you see the slide. Cool. All right. So yeah, we're going to talk about getting rooftop solar growing again. And the title should imply a little bit about what the backdrop is, but I'm going to walk through where we stand right now with rooftop solar and then the path forward. But this is essentially what we're really talking about right now. Just a little bit of background. Lately I've been really feeling the desire to want to kind of go back in time a little bit and just kind of like remind ourselves, well, a lot has happened in the last 20 years. And if you go back to around 2005, there wasn't really a lot of solar in California. And if you wanted it, you had to be either wealthy or very, very technical. And that's not the case today, although we're going backwards now, but we'll get to that. But, if you remember the Enron scandal and the rolling blackouts and all that kind of stuff, that created a moment in time where the people who think like the way we do, you and I, got the powers that be to put in place a new set of policies to basically just jumpstart a rooftop solar market in California out of thin air. I mean, there was a lot of talk about it, but it had never happened. And the Enron scandal created the political moment. And it wasn't just Governor Schwarzenegger there were also some key people in the legislature from both parties, some key NGOs that really pushed it, but it was a real milestone. And under the Million Solar Roofs initiative over the last 20 years, solar became mainstream. One of my favorite things, about running the Solar Rights Alliance, we have about 160,000 supporters, and they really are from all over the state. And so I get a front row seat every day to that. It's no shade on San Francisco. I want there to be lots and lots of solar everywhere, but it says something that there's 6 times more solar in Kern County than there is in San Francisco. And it's not, people get solar for a variety of reasons, and only one of which is to protect the environment. It makes economic sense. And that's the main reason why people do it. And that's amazing, because who cares? People do a good thing for all kinds of reasons. What we care about is that they're doing a good thing. 60% of all the rooftop solar that is now installed, of the 2 million solar rooftops, 60% is in working and middle class households. So this is the latest data from 2022. And so basically households that make 150,000 a year or less make up 60% of all the rooftop solar that's installed. And what's interesting to me too is look at the outlier. You got your households under 50,000 where you wouldn't expect there to be much of anything. And then you got your households making more than 250,000, and they're not that far apart. The trend line here has been really, really, really encouraging. And, you know, our vision is that it becomes something like this. Now, maybe it'll take a while to get there, but, you know, all emerging technologies start somewhere, and we're really well on our way here to getting rooftop solar to be something that everyday people can get. And this is really should be just the beginning, just the beginning. In 2019, we celebrated 1 million solar roofs. So it took about 15 years from the time that the law got passed and the initiative got put into place to getting the 1 millionth solar customer. And we did a big celebration at a school in Clovis. And this is sort of the ominous dark clouds hanging. You know, we had both Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor Brown there to celebrate. Governor Newsom was totally invited, did not attend, and didn't even put out a statement. And that should have told us something right there about where everything was going to be headed. Last year, California hit its second million roof milestone. So it took from 2006 to 2019 to get to the first million. And then it only took another 4 years from 2019 to 2023 to get to the second million. It should have been amazing. And instead, last year, that milestone came right at the biggest slowdown in rooftop solar in history, after the state spent basically 2 years prior gutting everything that had been done, just gutting all the policies that had gotten us to where we were. And so last year we should have been celebrating, but instead we were staring down basically rooftop solar going off a cliff because the state policymakers turned their back on the policies that got us here. And rooftop solar has been under attack for a while. I've itemized here some of the most recent stuff because sometimes it's easy to forget. Back in, you know, and it's been sort of like little death by 1,000 cuts things, and then also big baseball bat stuff. So in September of 2022, the governor signed a law that basically declared all small commercial projects to be a public works project, which, you know, once you're declared a public works project, the amount of red tape and bureaucracy that it takes, that's why they do it for bridges and roads, because these are gigantic projects where you kind of need a lot of checks and balances. A small commercial project like putting solar on a church should not be a public works project. But now it is. And so that was an attempt by PG&E's union and PG&E itself to try to, that was one of their death by 1,000 cuts things that they've been trying to do to just make it harder to get this stuff going. But then the big banana came in December 2022. That's what Diana was referring to, where the CPUC voted to slash by 80% the credit that people get for giving their extra solar energy back to the grid. You will recall, if you were in that fight, that it could have been worse. They also tried to do a $700 a year tax just for having solar panels on your roof, which we successfully defeated. So it could have been worse, but it was still pretty bad. Then late last year, the CPUC went even a step forward and then made it effectively impossible for apartments and schools and farms to get solar. Their decision was even worse than the one they had done for homeowners. Then just 2 months ago, again, the PG&E is behind all of this, but they use their union as a cudgel. Oftentimes, they got the state licensing board. This is a death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing, to basically strip solar contractors of their ability to install, repair, and even maintain solar-powered batteries, which is going to push even more companies out of business and also jeopardize solar warranties for consumers who have solar already, because if they want to put in a battery, they're not going to be able to go back and have their installer do it, and that could void the warranty. And then last month, the CPUC approved the highest utility tax in the country, $24 a month, or one of the highest utility taxes in the country at $24 a month. This is on all ratepayers, but as we're going to get into, it has a particular impact on rooftop solar. It's basically a backdoor solar tax. And then they also voted to basically make community solar impossible. And we can, if you're not sure what community solar is, let's add that to the questions, but I'm just trying to give you kind of a litany of all the things that have happened. And so not surprisingly, rooftop solar has gone off a cliff. Sales in the first quarter of this year were down an average of 80% year over year sales. An estimated 17,000 solar workers lost their jobs last year. To put that in perspective, before all of this bad stuff happened, there was about 65,000 rooftop solar workers across the state, most working for medium and small businesses. So that's a big chunk of the workforce that got a pink slip through these changes. And then battery sales are also down. I only mention that because for those of you that are following the story more closely, one of the justifications the CPUC gave for their things was that this was going to incentivize people to get more batteries. I can explain how in the questions if you're interested, but the point is they couldn't even achieve that. And we told them that that was going to happen. So everything is down now. It's really gone off a cliff and flatline. People are still getting solar, but in much smaller numbers. And the people that are getting solar are wealthier. So this whole trend line that we've had where we're getting solar in the hands of everyday people, we're now going backwards to the olden days when, the only people that could get solar were wealthier people. This utility tax is going to make it even worse when it goes into effect in 2026, and not just on solar users. So this utility tax would be $24 a month on most ratepayers. It's twice the national average. And it will increase electricity bills on 4 million households in California that don't use a lot of electricity. So obviously that includes people who have rooftop solar, but it also includes anyone that lives in an apartment, a condo, or a small home, which also tend to be people who are lower income. So the whole thing is basically a cost shift. You're basically making low energy users, including renters and including solar users, pay for people that use a lot of electricity, which is mostly people who live in large homes who tend to be wealthier. It's like the most regressive. It's being sold as progressive if you've been following the debate, but the outcome is going to be incredibly regressive. And it's uncapped. So $24 a month, the CPUC has said has been clear that that's just the beginning. The utilities have said that they want this to increase to $70 a month or more. And the utilities almost always get what they want at the CPUC. So you can just see exactly where this is headed. So this is terrible for anyone who lives in an apartment, condo, or small home. But this could be the beginning of the end for solar if we don't turn things around. And so then you just go like, okay, well, who's standing up for solar? Like, okay, that's the CPUC, that's nice, but what about, the people that are making the laws? Where's the ref? Is as this cartoon does it. The legislature killed or gutted all but one bill intended to fix this mess. And I want to say at the outset, I double checked with Diana just to make sure I had this right. Your assembly members and senators for the San Mateo County are standouts. And later on in the presentation, I want to just name them because I think those folks are not the ones that tried to kill this. In fact, they were the ones that were trying to do the right thing. And I think we need them now more than ever to double down on their leadership here. But we had bills to stop this big utility tax, to contain it. They died. We had bills to get rooftop to basically reverse the damage that I outlined before that the CPUC had done. They died. We even had bills to reduce utility influence in Sacramento, and those died. There was a bill that simply said that utilities cannot use ratepayer dollars for political advertising, and the legislature voted that bill down. That's how captured, these guys are in the legislature. And so, obviously, less rooftop solar is bad for everyday people because obviously then that's you've taken a choice, so, the ability of people to make a choice that would allow them to control their electricity bills. When I got on, I think I overheard David talking about, keeping his AC off until 9 o'clock. These are choices people have to make. There are some people where not running the AC on a 100-degree day is a life or death kind of situation. But also not being able to have enough money to buy food is a life or death situation. So taking away rooftop solar for everyday people has implications as one less choice for people, one less tool to be able to control their electricity bills. But I think this is I know this is a Democratic group, so I'm going to go out on a limb and go that this is a group that is concerned about climate change. This is turning the state's clean energy goals into a joke. And so you probably saw the headlines, there's always a couple of days in April or May where 100% of the state's electricity needs are met by renewable energy. And there's always these big headlines going, California, we're doing it. And it's actually nonsense. We are not on track. What I want to see is the headline in the hottest days in August and September and asking, how much fossil fuels are we burning on those days? And the answer is a lot. 40% in 2022, the last year that we have data, 40% of our electricity came from natural gas. And you can see, like, just go back 10 years to 2012, you can see we haven't really moved the needle that much. Considering everything that, California has been saying, like the fact that we're at 40% and that we've kind of been stuck in the last 5 years, kind of in and around there, like that's a problem. We use a lot of fossil fuels still in California. And we really need to be like getting as much renewable energy on the grid as possible. And we're not one of those people that's like only rooftop solar. We're all of the above kind of people at Solar Rights Alliance. So we're like, yeah, solar farms. Yeah, wind farms. I mean, that stuff is bad for the desert. So we got to be thinking about like, how do we not do it as much as we need to? But obviously we need to do it. It's either that or like fossil fuels. But the bottom line is, even if you didn't care about the desert or you didn't care about any of those things and you were just like, screw it, screw the turtles and all that kind of stuff, we actually can't get 100% clean energy with just wind farms and solar farms in large scale. And this chart really tells you, I think, really, really well. So California has to build so much renewable energy. It's like crazy. But they have to build wind, they have to build geothermal, they have to build solar. If we just look at solar, California has to build 6 gigawatts of solar every single year between 2020 to 2045 if they want to get to 100%, if we want to get to 100% by then. And we have not built 6 gigawatts per year in the last couple of years. We've come close, but we haven't gotten to 6. In 2020, we got to a little less than 3. In 2021, we got a little over 5. 2022 was a pretty good year, but 2023 was not. We fell short. And if you look at the split here, the yellow is the amount of new rooftop solar that went in. And the black is the amount of new solar farms that went in, right? So you can see you need both to get to where you're going. And also you can see that in the last couple of years, and this has been very consistent, about roughly half of the new solar that's going in has been rooftop. So now you take all that out, you're left with this. You have to then get all of it, all of it. So we project going forward, this is what you're going to be seeing with rooftop, is this orange, this kind of light orange. Like we were up here and we could have kept going, but now we're going down here. That's how much we're going to be adding with these changes. And this is like even before we factor in the impact of the utility tax. That means that what has been black here, that's what you have to make up with solar farms. Good luck. You're not going to be able to do it. You're just not. Even if you didn't give a lick about the desert, you just can't do it. It takes too long to get it up and running, and there isn't enough viable space. There's still permitting requirements, all those kinds of things, transmission and distribution. You're just not going to do it. And so that's the implication here, is that the state is basically going, we're not worried about the rooftop solar flatlining because we're going to get the rest of it with this, and they're just not. So how does the state officials justify slashing rooftop solar like this? You might have heard the phrase the cost shift. And this is basically an argument where what they say is rooftop solar is too expensive. It's cheaper to put solar and wind farms down in the desert and pipe that electricity in than to subsidize people to put solar panels on their roof. And what's worse is that solar users, that once they get solar, they take their ball and they go home, and then they don't pay their fair share of the grid, which means then that the people who don't have solar then have to pick up the tab, and that's why electricity bills are going up. Essentially, the reason why everyone is paying out of their nose for electricity is because of rooftop solar. It is the ultimate scapegoat story, but it is a story that if you talk to most lawmakers and policymakers and their staff in Sacramento, they think it is true. Most of the public doesn't buy it, but the small bubble of insiders in Sacramento absolutely believe that rooftop solar is the culprit for rising electricity bills, and we have got to curtail rooftop solar. It is an example of an incredible disconnect between the decision makers and the truth, and also where the public is at. And I have this cartoon here just to kind of illustrate the irony of this, but it is a classic scapegoat story, just right out of the right out of the pages of scapegoating in history. So just because I don't want to take anyone for granted, if you're kind of like going, all right, well, is the cost shift true? Like, just, is there any truth to it? The answer is no, it's not. What's the reason why electricity prices are, why we're paying out of our nose for electricity, is because of out of control utility spending. And I like this chart. It's a lot to look at, but let me explain it because I think it tells you what's really going on. These solid lines is essentially utility spending on transmission and distribution, long distance power lines. That's the biggest part of your electricity bill. And then the dashed lines is the rate of inflation. What the spending would have been had their spending been done at the rate of inflation. And you can see, let's take distribution for a moment, just how the whole thing has just outpaced inflation, and both distribution and transmission has risen way faster than the rate of inflation. Over the last 25 years, together, this spending has gone up 500%. And so then you may ask, okay, but was that spending justified? No. Over that same time period, peak use of electricity has been flat. So if you went back to this chart and you plotted out peak electricity use, it would basically be a solid, like a straight line. So peak electricity use hasn't really changed very much over the last 25 years, thanks to energy efficiency, thanks to conservation, thanks to rooftop solar. But utility spending on the back end infrastructure has gone up by 500%. So how did we get there? It's basically just regulators are asleep at the switch. And that's not surprising to any of us, but it's just true. 60% of utility spending is self-approved, meaning like they literally just get to do it, and regulators don't have to even scrutinize it. And then the remaining 40% has just been one rubber stamp after another, after another, after another, after another. And from the utility standpoint, they're behaving in a very logical way because utilities get to make an 8 to 12% profit off of all transmission and distribution spending. So to just go back for a second, every dollar that they spend building poles and wires, that gets charged to you and me and everybody else. But on top of that, they get to tack on an 8 to 12% profit that you also that gets baked into your electricity bill as well. Well, heck, if I had that kind of deal going, I'd be trying to spend as much money as possible too, because you're paying for the money that I spend and I get a profit in return. It's an incredible racket, and it's been working for 25 years. So they're incentivized to do that. The regulators look the other way or just rubber stamp, and the rest of us are just, essentially footing the bill and hitting a breaking point. And then, God forbid that some ratepayers should say, gosh, I can put these solar panels on my roof and reduce my electricity bill. And now they're basically going, no, it's turning around and basically blaming those same consumers who are just trying to get out from under an unsustainable situation. This cost shift argument was invented by a national utility trade group in 2012, in fact. And the reason why we know that is because the strategy memo that was developed by the Edison Electric Institute, so that's SoCal Edison's parent, it's a trade group that they founded. They hired some very slick, PR people to put together a memo on basically how to both burnish their image and also in particular go after rooftop solar. And so this was all spinsters. This had no data. This was all clever marketing is how it started. But then, of course, when they wanted to take the cost shift to California, they needed data. And so how are you going to get the data to back it up? Well, again, they have a lot of influence over the CPUC. So they got the CPUC to hire a firm called E3. And they hired E3 to basically do the cost benefit analysis of rooftop solar. And if you dig in, this is their website. And if you go to their client list, you see that it contains 32 private utilities, including the 3 big private utilities here in California. So it's just a huge conflict of interest. Like you're hiring a vendor, the government is hiring a vendor to do what's supposedly independent research, but the vendor is on the take. Their whole business model is based on contracts with the utilities. And so not surprisingly, E3's work is just riddled with all kinds of problematic assumptions and cherry picking that just make it look like there's a cost shift. But all you have to do is go under the hood and look at the computer models that they built to just see that it's just all cherry picked assumptions and all kinds of other things. And the utilities have a couple of allies that seem like independent nonprofit groups, the Public Advocate, TURN, NRDC, the Legislative Analyst Office. And you'll see them out there saying that the cost shift is a real thing. And so then sometimes legislators will go, well, NRDC is saying it. But the thing is, if you look at NRDC's citations, all they're doing is going back to E3's information. They're not doing any independent work of their own. So, and we can get into why NRDC, some of you might be members of NRDC, and I'm happy to talk about how they just went off the deep end on this stuff. But the point is like, this is where the numbers come from. Whenever you hear a legislator or somebody who seemingly ought to know better say, no, the cost shift is real, they're getting the data, the numbers from a utility consulting firm hired by the CPUC. And so the truth is the opposite. Rooftop solar is actually saving all ratepayers money, whether or not they have solar. The folks that manage the grid in 2018 alone, they scaled back about $2.5 billion of transmission and distribution because of rooftop solar and energy efficiency. Some really well-respected economists estimate that solar roofs actually save about $3 billion a year in avoided generation and infrastructure. It kind of makes sense. If people are making energy on their rooftops, then over time, the utilities don't have to build as many transmission and distribution lines. And that actually plays out in real time, even with the lax regulation. One study, a very well-done study, estimates that if we continue to grow rooftop solar and batteries, we can slash about $120 billion from the cost of the grid over the next 30 years. A nonprofit in San Diego called Protect Our Communities Foundation has shown how we could have avoided some billions of dollars of spending had we just turned more to rooftop solar and batteries. So there's a lot of evidence showing that rooftop solar actually saves all ratepayers money and should be a key strategy towards reducing the cost of the grid. You know, and that's really, if we care about high electricity prices, forget about solar for a second, policymakers have got to focus on reining in out of control utility spending. And as it turns out, rooftop solar and batteries can be one very, very important strategy to control out of control spending, because the more that we have that, we don't have to build as much of that long distance infrastructure. It doesn't go away altogether, but it's one of the cost containment strategies that the state ought to be using. Your solar is the solution. And then, you know, with respect to climate change and clean energy, I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're going to fail unless we get rooftop solar growing again. We just need to get more electrons onto the grid. And this should be a pedal to the metal moment. We are just going like everything to get off fossil fuels. And we just can't do it with solar and wind farms alone. We need the rooftops as well. And, you know, also people are more likely to get that heat pump, to get that electric car, to get that if that doesn't spike their electricity bill, you know, another couple of $100s a month. If they have rooftop solar, it can become a gateway drug to that electric car. It certainly was for our family. We wouldn't have thought about that. But once we started making clean energy and saw our electricity bill go down, we were like, hey, let's get that EV. When our stovetop, our gas stove went on the fritz, we were like, let's get that induction stove. It was a gateway drug to that. And this is happening. So this is the path. So where do we go from here? In the short run, we have one bill that's still alive that would help to restore the right of renters and schools and farms to do solar. And that would be a big deal. It wouldn't help homeowners, but it would help these other cohorts. And it is a bill that is alive. Your very own Senator Becker is the author of it. And it cleared the Senate. We were very surprised, given the dynamics we were talking about. And it is now in the Assembly. And so make sure that your Assembly members vote for it. I encourage you guys to thank Assembly members Ting, Pappen, and Berman, and Senators Wiener and Becker. They are the rare champions. It is really something to come to a Democratic club here. And I was looking at your people and going like, oh, you got all the good ones. And so we need them to keep it up. Like, I bet some of them, they might be a little discouraged at the way things went down this year. We need them to like double down. So going forward, it would be great if you basically send them the message of going like, keep it up, keep it up, keep it up, don't give up, don't give up. And then let's help them refine their arguments and rebut this misinformation. I know, you know, some of us have been talking to Senator Becker's office. They definitely need help rebutting the cost shift. We can help them do that. And let's just like, you guys can be like the Jedi, you know, that are going to like lead the state out. And so there's more to say. There's so much more we need to be doing to turn the tide here, but I've already talked too long. So I'm going to stop the presentation and we can shift to questions.
And Thank you. Thank you, Dave. That was just such a great introduction. I do ask everybody to, yes, please raise your hand so that we can take everybody in order. And Diana, you've got your hand up first.
Yes, I wanted to get this in right away before I forgot. So, as secretary of our DFA, my plan, if it's okay with you, Dave, is to share this video with our legislators and the slide deck, because I think it's going to help. Not all of our offices have people who are focused on environmental issues, but some of them do. And so I think this will be helpful for them. And you explain it so well. And I was having a difficult time before we met with you the first time, rebutting the comments about the cost sharing kind of idea. So this is terribly helpful, and I think would be helpful for them as well.
Yes,
All right.
feel free to share it. Yeah, would love to open. We want an open door with these, legislative champions who clearly have the right idea.
Right. Marshall, your hand's up next.
Yes, thank you. Great presentation. And it starts to help clarify a lot of the issues. It seems to me that what you pointed out when you said that the NRDC and Turn, you didn't go into Turn much, but that they're supporting the faulty information, and the faulty information goes back to intentionally making it faulty, which strikes me as fraud. And so I'm wondering if there's any way to approach it from that point of view, but it clearly goes back to Newsom because of money support from the fossil fuel industry. So my question is, what is the best strategy to get in the face of people like Newsom and the supporters of the fossil fuel industry, because they get so much money from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say with respect to the legislature, let's just start there. Your cup runs over here in San Mateo County, obviously, but we don't have to look very far north, south, east, or west to find, your cohorts are represented by people who just are not doing the right thing. And I think one thing that, and I'm speaking to you all as the San Mateo folks, is I think the more that we can educate other Democratic committees about what their legislators, where they ended up coming down in this, because I think these last 6 months have been very instructive about like where people stand. Not always, but I think we've got a lot more data now about where lawmakers stand. And I think the solar cause could use your help in having similar presentations and discussions like this with more of the clubs, and just kind of socializing and raising more awareness about where we stand and where their lawmakers are, so there can be some nudging, some accountability, just all the things that go into that. So I think what's got to happen with the legislature. So I think there's a lot of just informing people about where we stand. With respect to Newsom, gosh, I really don't know. I mean, I invite your own thoughts. I mean, he's a big disappointment. I don't know what else to say. He's chosen a side. Newsom is pro renewable energy as long as it's the utilities renewable energy. That much is clear. But I've already pointed out why that's problematic, and he's got 2 more years left. He has room to redeem himself. I always believe in redemption. But maybe he won't do that. And so then maybe there's no way to convince him otherwise, because he's not like he's going to get recalled or anything, and not over this. And, he presumably has made a choice because he thinks somehow this is going to attract the kinds of campaign donors he needs to run for president. So, perhaps, so perhaps there's some accountability that can be done. Perhaps it's also looking to who are the likely candidates to replace him and, getting them now to be better. I will say one thing though about Newsom, now that you're seeing me talk out loud, and that's part of why I like these things. His story is California is leading the way to get to 100% clean climate change. He went to the Vatican, all that kind of thing. We have noticed that he doesn't like it when people point out the inconvenient fact that 40% of California's electricity is still dirty, or that now California's clean energy goals are off track. So another thing that you can do if you want to get the governor's attention, and maybe even get President Biden's attention, is to point that out over and over again in the news media, because it kind of messes up Newsom's story. And that might be an incentive for him, because then it makes it harder for him to run for president under a look at me, I'm the climate change guy. So those are just some thoughts. I don't have all the answers. It's not like I've got a campaign to present to you, but I think this is kind of something that smart people like all of us need to ask this question and then just try a bunch of things. That's usually how political movements work, is lots of people asking the question, trying a lot of things, and then something happens because we're right and the people are with us.
Okay. Ashley, you're next.
Oh, hi, Dave.
Hi.
This is kind of following up what Marcia was talking about. There was the thought, when they did the big cutback on solar energy, that maybe what Newsom was doing was letting this happen, and then when it became obvious that the bottom would fall out of the solar rooftop industry, that he would be able to use that as evidence that they had to go back and provide more incentives. But that does not seem to be happening, right?
Correct. Like, if anything, the way they pushed so hard to get this utility tax, just like literally before the ink was even dry on the changes they made to net metering, I think told us a lot about, Newsom's proclivities here. And then if you add then on top of that, I kind of only went through it briefly in April, the contractor licensing board basically stripped all solar contractors of the ability to like even maintain a battery that they had installed previously. That's going to throw, a bunch of medium and small businesses into complete turmoil. I just heard yesterday that one of the state boards that governs HOAs is blocking a bunch of solar projects from going in to HOAs and mobile homes. This is all coming from the top. So yeah, I don't have any illusion now. I think previously you're right. I think we thought maybe there was some actual, like, just they were convinced and they were wrong, but they would correct. But this all the evidence is that this is an intentional, move. We know that PG&E is just very, very powerful. In the Newsom administration, there are former PG&E people, that staff him. He's tight with PG&E's union, which is contractually obligated to defend PG&E's business model. There's like literally a contract there. I am never going to, I'm not impugning unions. I know this is a pro-union audience. This is just about one particular union, but it's relevant because they're very, very powerful and very aligned with PG&E. So yeah, no, I'm not optimistic about Newsom. I think it's going to have to be the legislature that stands up and just says, I'm going to stand up for consumers.
Well, I think we need to let him know, as voters are important to his dreams of being president too. And we can let him know that we don't have a high opinion of someone who pretends to be a climate champion, but is not, in fact.
Yeah.
And I think I agree. And I think you have two ways of doing that. One is obviously you can directly communicate that to him in all the ways that you can do that. I do think another place where you can get his attention is where you can get media, both earned, old-fashioned media, and then kind of like, the interwebs media.
Mm.
talking about both rooftop solar has gone off a cliff, what gives? Aren't you supposed to be, at rooftop, you're sending rooftop solar off a cliff at a time that we need to be putting pedal to the metal, what gives? And then also pointing out California is actually not on track. We get 40%, we're still getting a ton of our electricity from dirty fossil fuels. That disrupts his narrative that he's trying to tell as he's building up a run for president. And you're kind of ruining his party a little bit if you can get those facts out there. And that's another way that might get his attention. Maybe not in a way where he stands up and goes, "You're right, I'm wrong. We're going to reverse." But it might mean that kind of behind the scenes, things start to get easier, and the ship starts to turn.
Okay, we can do that.
And letters to the editor, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Gail, you're up next.
Yes, Dave, thanks for all your work, and we're happy to have you. Would you like to say a few words about the advertising that PG&E does about them undergrounding utilities? And I just presume they would say this escalated spending on infrastructure is because they're undergrounding, parentheses, after many years of not doing the right thing, and just, sending all the money to stockholders. Also, I was wondering, well, I guess you already addressed that about what we can do about Newsom. So I wonder if he's going to improve if he doesn't get picked as a last minute presidential candidate, if he'll maybe get better after the election is over.
Right.
2 questions.
Yeah. Well, so the undergrounding is a perfect example of what I was talking about before about utility spending. And actually, this is where an example of, we live in a world, nothing is black and white in the world. I think the older I get, the more I realize, many things can be true at once. And, so like Turn, which we are very much disagree with them. And I think it is just the Yiddish word would be a shanda, like a real shame on them for what they're doing to attack rooftop solar. I think that's really counterproductive to their mission. But Turn, it's, nobody is wrong all the time and nobody is right all the time. I'm not right all the time. But Turn is, I think dead on. They've been very much criticizing PG&E's plan to underground. And one of the things that and other people have been too. Loretta Lynch, former PUC president, has pointed out that, the cost of undergrounding is orders of magnitude more than other things that you could do that work just as well to mitigate the risk of wildfires. So there's an insulating technique. I'm not the guy, that's going to tell you all about it, but Turn knows about it. Former PUC presidents know about it. And there's a way you can insulate the lines that still cost money, but it's like $100 million a line as opposed to like $1 billion or $100 million a mile as opposed to $1 billion a mile. And with like basically the same risk, reward kind of thing with respect to safety. The utilities always go in and they do the gold-plated version of whatever it is that they want. And what we need is for regulators and lawmakers to be coming in and being like, okay, look, we take safety seriously, we take reliability seriously, but what are the other options? How can we avoid spending this much? Is there a lower cost option to do this? Or is there a way we can do this where we don't have to do it at all? And so the undergrounding is a perfect example of that. And there's lots of other examples like this. There was a second question that was a follow-up on Governor Newsom, and I forgot what it is. Do you mind just restating it again?
Oh, well, I thought that once the elections are over and he didn't get picked to run for president, that he might improve.
Maybe. Yeah, I think this is where I think the key is what we were talking about before when I was answering Ashley's question is if we want, politics is all, or organizing is all about improving what the range of the possible will be. Like once politicians decide, once the things change for politicians, like the math, the political math, they start doing things that you never would have imagined them doing before. I mean, the fact that we got a bill introduced to roll back the utility tax in January is kind of amazing. because in the fall, when we started doing that, there was no legislator that ever wanted to do anything. And then people went to town hall meetings and they just went bananas last fall. And then there was 20 legislators like, I'm hearing so much from my constituents, I have to do something. And that's how we got a bill introduced. So we changed the math for politicians, the work that you do. And so I think by expressing in very, clear and firm terms to Newsom directly how disappointed you are and what you expect from him, and then, ruining his message in the press, and just, telling the truth about what's really happening with California's climate change goals, you might get a scenario that you outlined, maybe. And that would be good. And if we don't, then we will set the stage for something good, potentially in the successor. So there's no reason not to do it one way or another.
So my turn. First of all, I want to say, because Diane Pappin is my assemblywoman, and frankly, I'm shocked that she's in favor of this, and delighted because we have talked to her, and maybe she's hearing our message, maybe she's hearing it from other groups. But a year ago, that wasn't even, we would never have believed it, because a year ago she was not at all interested in anything. So something has gone on, and I'm just thrilled that she is putting her support here. And it could be because she's, pals with, she's our group, our local legislators do talk to each other. So, and Senator Becker is a great influence. And we're all very happy about that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I want to ask you about the CPUC. How does the legislature get more control? How do we get more control? Because they seem to be completely independent, and does the governor have anything that they can do other than appoint someone? I mean, are there any controls over this?
Right. Yeah. And here's the way I think about the CPUC. And I think of the CPUC as it's an instrument of the governor. The governor appoints the CPUC and thus essentially elevates them to a position of power. And even though the CPUC is technically independent, it's just anyone who's an insider in Sacramento just knows that they're not independent. They do what the governor wants. And this is not just Newsom. This is just the way it works. This is the way it worked with Brown, and this is the way it worked with Schwarzenegger, and this way it worked going all the way back. Pete Wilson, Like it's just the CPUC is an instrument of the governor. So when the governor wants something to happen, then the CPUC will implement it. And so then obviously the governor can be a check, but we've already talked about that. We have a problem. So then, yes, the legislature can be a check too. And that's what AB 1999 was about. So just to kind of give that as an example, the legislature, remember, this utility tax was created by the legislature in a very sneaky way in 2022 through a budget trailer bill. Most of the legislators didn't even realize that they were, basically creating an uncapped utility tax in the hands of the CPUC because it was snuck into a giant bill. But once they realized it, and the constituents spoke up, and people like, Assemblymember Pappin listened and became a co-author on AB 1999, The bill itself was very, very simple. And it just simply said, yes, the CPUC can do a utility tax, but it's capped at $10 a month. It can only rise with the rate of inflation. And it only lasts for 5 years. And if the CPUC wants to continue it, it has to come back to the legislature and justify it. That's basically what AB 1999 was. So it gave the CPUC some guardrails. It said, yes, we're going to empower you to figure out a modest utility tax, but it can't go up any further than inflation. And after a couple of years, you have to come back and tell us why you need it again. And that's the kind of, and the legislature rejected that. And that's the kind of policymaker that we need more of in spades. You don't want the legislature setting rates. Like, that's just going to be, you need a regulator. So like, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But you need the legislature to just set some terms, and they could do that with rates as well. And they could create a review board, and they could do a number of things with utility spending plans. That's the kind of thing that we want to start pushing them to do in the coming years. I have a mind to start another group called Ratepayer Revolt that would just do this, scrutinize, anyway, it's exactly what it sounds. And it would be about turning the legislature into a real partner here, by using just the fury that I assume that we all feel over the way this whole thing has spiraled out of control.
Thanks. Flavia, you're up.
Okay, yeah, Carrie and I had attended a book reading about the history of the effort to save the redwoods. And it's actually kind of a euphemism, because of the couple million acres of redwoods that we used to have, we have maybe 4% left. So the book kind of narrates the struggle of who all were the players and how all did this happen, that we only ended up with 4%, even though everybody was aware how important the redwoods are to, our coast and everything else in our environment. And it turns out that the money was just too good. So I guess my question is there going to be a time where we say it's not all about the money, and we just have to make these legislators wake up and say this, the head of the UN said that we're on the climate highway to hell right now. So at some point we just have to say, we don't care how good the money is on that side. We have to do something different.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, it's just well said. It's the truth that's just staring us in the face. And, when you break the whole thing down, like this, that, and the other, the cost shift, these percents and that kind of thing, it's just obvious that at this moment in time, because of which is what we know now, we need to get off fossil fuels really, really fast. And we have to replace them with renewables. And the renewables have to come from everywhere as fast as we possibly can. Now. And that kind of just urgency, there's a lot of talk about the urgency. And I think what you're saying, the spirit with what you're saying has to get communicated so that talk is consistently translated into action. And by no means do we do anything that takes us backwards. Like just to go backwards, to slow down, I think when you look at it from the perspective of climate change, it's just immoral.
Thanks. Diana, you're up.
Thanks. Well, I have two kind of quick questions. One is, what was the vote on the legislative consideration of reversing the CPUC decision and to remove the benefits to solar residential solar families, residents? And the other is, do tell me about the community utility agencies, because I am one of those who pays extra to the Peninsula Clean Energy so that the energy I receive is 100% clean. And so after seeing your graph, I'm thinking that I'm just paying them extra for nothing. So.
All right, so two questions there. So there were two bills that were specifically aimed at reversing the CPUC decision on net metering. One dealt with, there were two decisions. One dealt with homeowners and one dealt with multifamily homes and schools and farms, but it's a little bit different, and there's different things that are outrageous about each, but just two things. And so there were three bills to address those two problems. I think we've already said one of the bills, Senator Becker's bill to address the issue with apartments and schools and farms, is still alive. And let's keep it that way and get it all the way home. So there were two bills that died to address the the biggest part of the problem, which is, the credit that essentially homeowners get for sharing the extra energy with the grid. That's really what's caused the collapse. One bill was sponsored by Assemblymember Connolly. The other one was sponsored by Assemblymember Friedman. I don't think it's necessary to get into the policy, but just to say those were bills. They were good. They were supported by a lot of people. And they didn't even really come up for a vote even. They were scheduled for a vote in the Assembly Utilities and Energy Committee. Assemblymember Connolly, basically the night before the bill was scheduled for a hearing, was told by the Assembly leadership that, yes, they would be happy to hear his bill, but only if he accepted a bunch of amendments that would have essentially just gutted the bill. And he, in my opinion, correctly said, I'm going to pull the bill. Like, we're going to do this right or we're not going to do it. So it never even got, up for a first vote. Assemblymember Friedman's bill, basically the same thing happened in a slightly different way. Trying to just decide if it's really important to get into all the details. Basically, she accepted, same thing, the night before the bill was supposed to be voted on, she was approached by the leadership, accept these amendments or your bill won't get heard. And then what she did was accepted the amendments and then turned the bill. And then a few steps later in the process, she turned the bill into something totally different, unrelated to solar, because she just needed a vehicle for something else. But basically it died. You didn't ask about this, but it's worth just kind of touching on is AB 1999. The way that that bill died was just a spectacular exercise in utility thuggery in the legislature. So it was up for a vote in Assembly Utilities and Energy. The author of the bill, Jackie Irwin, I think we felt like the votes were there. Like even the chair of the committee, Cotty Petrie Norris, was ready to vote for it. At least she was telling constituents that she was going to vote for it. And then I think it was like, I forget if it was a day before or just a few days before, the speaker, Robert Rivas, yanked the bill, like literally pulled it out of that committee altogether and put it in the Rules Committee. And that week that it had to happen, it had to pass out of the Utilities and Energy Committee by that Friday, or else it was dead. There's like deadlines for bills to pass out of their first policy committee. So Rivas yanked it out, put it in Rules, and basically told Rules, this isn't going anywhere. And then the clock ran out and the bill died. That's phase one. A backlash ensued. You might remember this from early May. The LA Times and San Francisco Chronicle wrote some pretty scathing pieces about this and named Rivas. And there were articles basically going like, why did Rivas kill the utility tax bill? And then his constituents started hammering away at him. One of the folks in the Stop the Utility Tax Coalition is a dynamite organization that works with farm workers. They were lobbying him like this is going to screw over farm workers who live in small homes. And so he got thousands of calls. And so then he negotiated with Jackie Irwin some amendments to the bill that weren't awesome, but they were still kept the structure of the bill intact and would solve the problem in a big way. And then as part of that deal, allowed the bill to come out of Rules. Like the rules don't really matter once the speaker decides that something's going to happen. So it went back to Utilities and Energy. It passed out of Utilities and Energy. The next day, it then was set to go to the Appropriations Committee, and then it was going to go to the Assembly floor. The Appropriations vote should have been a formality because the main thing is it gets out of its Policy Committee, the committee that's supposed to kind of think about energy bills. The Appropriations was just like, whatever. And usually bills and appropriations they deal with hundreds of bills every session, every time they sit down. There were 600 bills to be considered that day. And usually the bills are either on the consent file, meaning like they just pass them all in one vote, or on the suspense file, which means we're not doing it. And this bill, the chair of the committee, Buffy Wicks, represents kind of Berkeley, Oakland. This one bill out of the 600 did a roll call vote. And the way that it went down was she said, okay, we're going to hear AB 1999 now. We're going to do a roll call vote. I'm not recommending any vote here. Let's do a roll call. This is no debate. And then they do the roll call, and at first they start with the chair, and the chair doesn't say anything, which means not voting, abstaining. And then they just went around, and it was just deathly quiet as they called out each member's name. Everyone just abstains. There was 2 members, Gail Pellerin, props to her, and Tim Grayson, props to him, who voted for it. Everybody else, it was just deathly quiet. That's a trick they use. Abstaining is a way of voting no, but then you're not on record as voting no. So when your constituents kind of like come at you, they're like, what are you talking about? I didn't vote on this bill. That's how that was killed. And Rivas basically, I think, double-crossed, like just there was never any, because that wouldn't have happened had not the speaker basically said to the chair of the Appropriations Committee, this is what you're going to do. And they will never have any evidence of that, but that's how that went down. I'm talking to a group of savvy political people. So I'm just telling you the unvarnished Dave's take on, what actually happened and then Dave's take on it.
Yeah, that was pretty surprising. Buffy is usually a, yeah. All right. Gail and Marshall, let's make it quick because we're running out of time. Gail, you're up. Gail, are you there? You're muted. There you
Sorry.
go.
Yeah,
right.
I'm hoping that somewhere you have a document you can share with us that gives the details on how they cook the books in case we're asked. It would be nice for us to know that level of detail. And also a document perhaps that outlines alternatives to undergrounding. So it would be nice if we had that information under our belts if we go to lobby.
Yes. So with respect to the first thing, the slide deck, which I believe we had said before, will just get shared. I've tried to put the sources for everything that's there at the bottom with a link. And so you should, all these things are like layers of an onion, but that's a good place to get started at least. And then there's some places where I just couldn't, it was just I just didn't put the source in either because I was moving too quickly or I just couldn't find it really easily. So if for some reason you're just not finding the source you need or the source doesn't make any sense, give me a holler. My goal is to help everyone just get to the top, what do you call it? Like the top 1% of understanding of this stuff. And it's not that hard to do.
Oh,
So
and I do have
thanks for
another
digging into
request. Dave, can we get you to work on the water issue in California? We need you.
Oh my God, I think about that way too much. Yeah, I'd love to work on that. I'm very, very nervous about water.
All right. Marshall, last question.
Okay, this is quick. I'm easily infuriated by this kind of stuff. And my usual fallback position is direct action. The only way that they actually got to hear anything about AB 1999 was to get irate people in their various constituency up in arms. My inclination is to have Sacramento days and embarrass them with pickets at their offices, actually. And I don't see any of that kind of action. Is there any group that's organizing that kind of activity to reach the speaker and whoever the key people that are opposing this are?
Well, first, I love that you mentioned the town hall meetings, because certainly our group is going to continue to encourage people as we get into the fall to just go back into those town hall meetings and, just be like, what the heck, like real accountability there for sure. Your other idea, I love it. I do not know of a group that is doing that right at this moment. If there is a group that is, up for doing that, I'd love to talk with them and join forces in some way. I think it's a great idea.
Well, we'll have to form one.
About putting it together, but I think it's a great idea.
We'll form one. I mean, it's just so outrageous.
Go for it.
And it's deadly. It's deadly serious. They act like, oh, it's just politics. It's not. It's deadly.
Well, I will say that I think that the utility tax has really lit a fuse under a lot of people. And so that might be the issue that's going to bring people together. There was a full page ad in today's Chronicle, and it was from various groups like Turn, but it was really going after, do you know what the legislature and the CPUC are doing? And here's these 5 things that they want changed. So I am hearing I'm starting to hear a lot more chatter. And if we can be of help to push any of this, yes, we'll definitely talk to our legislators, especially to thank them for being supportive. And maybe we can push at least that one bill, 1374, and see if we can get that done. Oh yes, and Flavia had shared some good pieces from the LA Times, some opinion pieces, and those were really very informative stories. And so it's, look out at what the papers are talking about too, because they're starting to really pay attention to this. So, well, Dave, it's been marvelous having you back again, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon. And I really love, I read your newsletters as they come out, and they always have some kind of action that we can take. So I'm often going, oh yeah, forward this out to the group, because make sure everybody sees it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. Enjoy the rest of your meeting. And yeah, let's just fight like hell. I think that's what we're gonna have to do. I love the sentiments that have been expressed here. You guys are an awesome group to be working with. Just a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Have a good evening.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thanks.